YouTube, welcome back. We are going to talk about the Warlock wrap-up and Falconer teaser. I'm primarily using Maxwell.gg for this reaction video. You should know that all of this information came from Air in Action RPG along with the IcyVeins team. So thank you for them for releasing the information and helping highlight some of the hype coming out in 1.0. Before we get started about the Warlock Mastery, you should know that Last Epoch is releasing on February 21st. So this month, in less than 3 weeks, which is great. You should know that Twitch drops are enabled for February 22nd, so the second day after it launches, and it'll be going for 2 weeks after that. So be sure to watch somebody on Twitch, me or your other favorite streamers out there, in order to get some cool MTX in-game. Other things that you ought to know are we have the Mastery, we have skills for Warlock, but there's some things we don't have. So we don't have unique items, which may be build enabling, who knows? We don't have class-specific affixes, those cool affixes that go on your relic, helmet, and body armor. And we don't know, like, the context of what else is going to be in the game. Like, are there new affixes? Are there new base types? How is the trade factions going to influence how you build your characters? We don't know any new idols, either like specific ones or generic ones. There's a lot of stuff we don't know, but we do know a lot about Warlock. So let's talk about Warlock here. You ought to know that Warlock it exists in the context. Oh man, we've got to talk about history. It exists in the context of Lich, because Lich is a really, really powerful place to be when it comes to like acolytes that are casting their own spells. So normally an acolyte is a Lich for self-cast stuff, and then you could also be a necromancer and do like minion kinds of things. Broadly speaking, those are the two categories for it. Warlock doesn't really seem to be a middle ground. There's like some support for minion-y stuff in here, and certainly you could be a necromancer and grab some of those minion-y stuff from the first half of the mastery that you still have access to. But Warlock definitely seems to be a caster style. It does not really seem to be a minion style, even though there's like a tiny bit of support for it. It wants you to be the one dealing damage. To support that, there are a bunch of new curses in the game, and you could either use the curses for utility, you can use the curses to juice up other parts of your build, you can use them for generic bonuses like more armor per curse on the target, or I deal more damage per curse on the enemy, or you can try to make the curses themselves deal damage. So we have a nice list here detailing what exactly the curses do. There's some cool things going on in these curses, and I would recommend using whichever website or Maxwell.gg to kind of peruse what's going on here. So I want to call out, I guess, all of these, So Anguish, it comes from some sources. It causes enemies to, reduces the damage over time that they deal to me. There's ones that deal damage when they hit another target, so like a reflect curse. Excuse me, like a reflect curse. There is deals physical damage over 10 seconds, so maybe you can use Decrepify along with Bleed, because they're both physical damage over time. Causes the target to take more damage based on how much health I'm missing, which is a really cool thing right there. We have Acid Skin, increasing the % chance for them to receive a crit. So that's kind of like critical vulnerability if you've ever played a rogue, blade dancer, a marksman in the past. And then there's Torment down here, reducing movement speed, and then all of these have some nice generic damage numbers on them as well. So these curses look like they're only available for Warlock. It doesn't look like other builds are going to be using these, but these are not the only curses available. Remember, there's also things like Spirit Plague counts as a curse. Marked for Death counts as a curse. Bone Curse, it actually counts as a curse. You might not have caught that one. So there's some other curses that we can stack up. And then if it says more armor per curse on the target, maybe you have 5 curses in a normal build. But if you're really going out of your way to juice this up, maybe you're getting all the way up to like 8 curses, for example. So those are like the kinds of numbers that I'm thinking about when I see more armor per curse on the target, or more damage per curse on the target. Like 5 is my bench point there. So the Warlock passive tree looks awesome. Before we get too far into this, I want to tie in one more piece of information for you, because I know you've played Last Epoch before, and if you haven't, oh boy, you should. It's a great time to be playing Last Epoch. This one down here says more damage. They take more damage based on my caster's missing health, and you'll remember that I said that Last Epoch, we got a context. Warlock is an acolyte thing, and there's like Necromancer, Lich, and Lich, importantly, has always had this thing called Death Seal, And Death Seal encourages you not to use Ward as a defensive mechanic, because Death Seal is Giga Shed. It gives you tons of damage, defense, stun mitigation. Death Seal gives you a ton of damage and survivability when you are playing a Lich, even if you're not using Reaper form, honestly. So to go along with that, you often didn't want to use Exsanguinous. You didn't want to have Ward, because as soon as you click Death Seal, all of your Ward disappeared. Warlock, on the other hand, it seems to have two options, at least two options. We could go a normal life-based character. We could do life plus Ward. That tends to be pretty good, using something like a Twisted Heart relic. Or we could go low life. And there's a couple things in Warlock that even reward you for going Exsanguinous, for going Last Step of the Living, for using the new experimental glove affix that gives you more of that Exsanguinous effect, where it drains your life and then gives you ward per second. There seems to be support for that. I would not be surprised to see people playing like a primarily ward-based or low-life Exsanguinous-based character with Warlock to take advantage of some of these nodes. Enemies take more damage over time based on the caster's missing health. And I think that's really cool. I don't know if it's like good or better or worse or what, but there's support for it, and I like to see support for archetypes that make you question, am I doing the right thing, or should I be building it in this other way instead? I think that's great. In the Warlock passive tree, I'm going to hover over a couple things here that really stand out to me. When I look at a bunch of things like this, I try to think about like, where am I excited to be spending my points? What is tying the room together here? And what's fluff? So I'm going to type in one thing here. Let's type in the word overload. And overloads are related to ailments, applying a bunch of ailments to enemies around you, and then a thing happens. And that thing will happen every 12 seconds, and you'll have a buff for the duration, but there's also like the big exciting thing that happens at the beginning. There's a bleed overload that causes you to deal more damage, and then it shoots out rip bloods once per second at nearby enemies around you, and that kind of sounds like an auto bomber. Kind of sounds cool. We have a poison overload. The poison overload, it's not written here, but it gives you up to 400% poison penetration against enemies if you have enough poison stacks on them, which kind of reminds me of poison before it got nerfed. So if you're interested in playing a poison Lich or poison Warlock, well, this is before the halfway point in Warlock, which means even if you're playing a Lich, you can still spec into this, and it seems like a really good way of getting those damage numbers back to where they used to be. We also have some explosions that go off. It's Defiling Nova, and then we can proliferate those poisons with the use of a potion here. So that's a cool one there. There's two more, and then there's some extra spice to talk about. In the necrotic section, we have Damn. Damn, the overload causes you to deal more damage based on how much health you're missing, and also how much health the enemy is missing. So this could be another example of, do I use Exsanguinous? Do I ignore that text? Do I make the enemies low on health and just call that good enough? But I think Damn looks really good to me. So this might be something that I try to use at the very beginning of the league. Down here we have Ignite, and Ignite gives you generic more fire damage. So it could be used in conjunction with spell fire damage over time. It could be used in conjunction with Ignite, or with just spell crit stuff. So there's a lot of stuff that you could do with the Ignite one as well. The Ignite has some fire whips that you can proc, which is kind of cool. And the Damn one has some damn chains that immobilize enemies and tie them to the ground. So they can still take actions. They're just gonna be standing in one place. Tying these two together, we have some Witchfire stuff. I think Witchfire is going to be something that you just use primarily for clear speed. I don't think it's going to be something that you use for single target. But in terms of clear speed, you can spec into this pretty early on. Like, you'll be, what, 25 plus, like level like 50, maybe 50 to 60. You'll end up getting this. So like you'll be doing like early monoliths, early to mid monoliths. And picking up Witchfire. Witchfire has a base damage of 600 damage, which is a ton of base damage. On top of that, you even have a huge more multiplier on top of it over here based on how much Ignite chance you have and global Damn chance with your necrotic skills. Cool. I think this is something that's worth exploring. The damage numbers are certainly super high. It's just a question of like, is it mechanically clunky or not? The last thing, let's close this out. The last thing to know about the overloads is there's one more piece up here called Vessel of Chaos, and there's a payoff for proccing as many overloads as possible, and that is just more damage over time per overload. So 1, 2, 3, 4, because Witchfire is not an overload. You can get up to 12% more damage off this node, which is great. I think it's really cool. You'll notice as you look in the skills that there's a lot more damage in the passive tree than there is on the skills. And it's not the perfect fix. Historically speaking, last Epoch, there have been some complaints like skills have too many more multipliers and my gear doesn't matter. Maybe you've heard that if you've been in the last Epoch community for a bit. But this, while not a perfect fix for it, is it's a step in the right direction. I like this idea a lot. There's a ton of threshold nodes in the mastery, and that makes me very happy. When I said I wanted to get a feel for the mastery tree and know where to spend my points, it seems like I'm going to be putting 5 points here to pick up this threshold. I'll be putting 3 points here to pick up this threshold, 5 points here to get this threshold. I feel like that's likely going to be what my Warlock tree looks like, because every one of these nodes looks so good. Poor Falconer, just like... We'll talk about Falconer, maybe. We might talk about Falconer. The Falconer Mastery Tree does not excite me quite as much as the Warlock Mastery Tree does. So that's a quick rundown of what's going on in Warlock. It's awesome. There's relevant defenses, there's relevant offenses, there's build around me nodes all over the place. You'll notice as you click through Chthonic Fissure, as you click through Profane Veil, it seems like every other node is a build around me node. And that makes me really excited. One of the things that I like most about Last Epoch is trying new things, building new things, combining my Lego blocks in a different way, trying to make other cool interactions happen. And every other node is something that you could completely build around and have as a focal point for your build. Like you could build around this and have Chthonic Fissure proccing zombies for you. Or you could build around this one instead, and all of a sudden, instead of being a spirit build or a curse build, you're a hit-based build, and you're spamming it as often as possible. Or maybe you're building around this build, or this node, and you want to stack as much necrotic resistance as possible. So all of a sudden, you're like Control F necrotic resistance and trying to find as many payoffs as possible for just stacking this one stat with alternate scaling. And that is really fun. For me, it's really fun for me, and hopefully it's also fun for you. There seems to be a lot of build around me's. And I sometimes in my YouTube community, my Discord, my Twitch channel, I call people like build scientists or mad scientists or people who are just tinkerers who like to tinker and try this and try this and try this. And they're not worried about getting to level 100 and they're not worried about having the biggest and coolest build. They just want to make something special happen. And if that sounds like you, you're going to love it. There's a lot of moving pieces. But let's talk about one last thing with regards to Warlock, and I think this is very important because there's a lot of people who are just now getting into Last Epoch and trying it out for the first time. Maybe it's been in the library, maybe they kickstarted a couple years ago, and they're just coming into the game. Warlock has a lot of moving pieces. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I also feel as though it's going to be an excellent starter build. It's going to be an excellent starter class for people. Why? Because the floor for your build is going to be quite high. The ceiling also quite high. But when I say that the floor for a skill or a floor for Warlock is going to be quite high, what I mean is even if you're just kind of screwing around, I think your build is still going to be quite good. Because Chthonic Fissure, this primary skill that I'm looking at right here, this skill is something that you get around like level 15 or so. So like when you first get to mastery, level 15, you spec into it, you become a Warlock, you get access to Chthonic Fissure. Chthonic Fissure is it's like a rectangle that you cast on the ground. It has a duration component to it. It shoots out projectiles. They home on enemies. They explode in an AoE. That duration component means that as you keep moving or as you keep dodging the enemies, this thing on the ground is basically a turret. It's basically a weird looking fissure from hell totem. It's basically a totem, right? And it procs a whole bunch of things, or you can spec it to proc a whole bunch of things. And mechanically speaking, Chthonic Fissure is going to be very, very new player friendly. You could use it for curse damage. You could use it for ignites. bleed, damn, zombies. You could proc Chaos Bolt. Your Chaos Bolts can proc Harvest. You can use those to proc Rip Bloods. You can play pretty much anything. And as long as you select one or even two, or hopefully just don't select all of them. But frankly, even if you select all of those things, I think you're still going to have a good time. I think it's going to be hard. Don't take this as a challenge, but I'm going to say it anyways. I think it's going to be hard to screw up Chthonic Fissure. Even as a brand new player, like you're reading these nodes, you're clicking on stuff, you're going to be killing monsters. You're going to be having a good time. I think this is just a mechanically strong skill that has lots of different avenues for scaling. And maybe there's one way that's best. Maybe there is. There might be one way that's best. But I think you're going to have a really good time experimenting with this, whether you're a brand new player, an experienced player, or anywhere in between. And that is awesome. I think that Chthonic Fissure, tying the room together along with all these other skills and the reworked Soul Feast coming over from the Lich Mastery, I think that's a really good addition to the game. I'm going to give you a couple ideas here at the end. I took some notes for you. I'm not going to show you all the notes because that's for a different video, baby. But I'm going to show you just a couple notes here. My notes are, what is Twitch chat excited about? I've been asking the questions because I know you're asking the questions as well. So what is my Twitch chat excited about? This is not what's the best build. This is not how am I going to destroy the end game. It's not that. This is what are people excited to try? What are the cool builds, the cool interactions that stand out to people that they want to experiment with? We have volatile zombie loops. These have existed in the past, and they're always quite fun. This means that Chthonic Fissure can summon a volatile zombie. Then Chthonic Fissure can also proc Chaos Bolt. Chaos Bolt can shoot the zombies, making them explode for even more damage. And then there's a menagerie of other things that you can proc off of those. People seem to be pretty excited about the volatile zombie stuff. Me, as a renowned hater of minion builds, will probably not be experimenting with this. But volatile zombie has always done a ton of damage. And if there's any way of juicing up the damage, I think this is definitely one that you're going to see pop up on Reddit and on YouTube. Because, first of all, the damage is probably going to be pretty high. This damage number over here, 35%, 75%, is like pretty absurd for a more multiplayer. But they're also like visually interesting because it's big zombie explosions, and who doesn't like that? The next one's Witchfire. Witchfire is in the mastery itself. I call this out as something that is probably only for clear speed because it kind of looks clunky, but the damage numbers do look super high here. So I expect to see some cool things be done with Witchfire. Next up is stacking necrotic resistance. Necrotic resistance is kind of weird because it's not really a damage number. But there's a number of payoffs for necrotic resistance, including unique items like Bone Clamor Barbet. You can get ward per second in your mastery. You can get ward retention based on your necrotic resistance. And then in Chthonic Fissure even, we have ways of scaling damage based on how much necrotic resistance we have. And that's just enough to start getting tier 7 necrotic resistance and actually being happy about that on your gear. Next up is Ghost Flame while moving. Ghost Flame is a channeling skill that exists. And normally a channeling skill, I'm kind of a hater of channeling skills, but you can move. And moving while channeling is pretty mechanically strong. We can also make it detach from us and continue even though we are no longer channeling it. That's mechanically interesting. But let's be real. If you're playing Ghost Flame, you're probably interested in having plus 50 movement speed and making it shoot in a circle and just like zooming through a map. I'm going to try it. It looks hilarious. This is something that I'm interested in trying as well. Next up is Pyre of Affliction. It's funny. I talked about in regards to Path of Exile. I always liked the aesthetic, and I think everybody likes the aesthetic of a melee witch that has a big ass two-handed sword or a two-handed axe. Because seeing the witch in Path of Exile have a big two-handed weapon in her hand, lugging it and dragging it behind her is so cool. It's huge anime vibes, and it's just awesome. So I like the idea of the Acolyte using a Pyre of Affliction, which is the big two-handed axe that comes from the Soulfire Bastion dungeon. But also the Soulfire Bastion and all of the unique items there are themed around having necrotic and fire damage. Warlock is also themed around having necrotic and fire damage. So it seems like there might be some forced synergy there. But I do think that Pyre of Affliction and how much damage it gives to Damn, the ailment, I think is going to be very, very strong, especially along with things like Damn Overload and potentially, maybe even being a low life build with Exsanguinous. And that brings us to the last thing here is low life crit Chaos Bolt. In Chaos Bolt's kind of like, oh man, what are those skills from Path of Exile? There's like a purple one and there's a red one. You know what? I don't even know. If Twitch chat can tell me what those skills in Path of Exile are called, you got it. In any case, one of the biggest moral multipliers that Chaos Bolt has access to, oh, Blazing Salvo and Forbidden Rite. God bless you, Twitch chat. That's the real Twitch chat advantage. One of the biggest moral multipliers that Chaos Bolt has is, first of all, innately, because it has multiple projectiles and they can shotgun, but also this one here, and it gives hit damage. So hit damage to damned things, hit damage to ignited things, and all of these are multiplicative with each other. So on top of that, we also have some synergy with critting things. Chthonic Fissure can proc our Chaos Bolts for us, and then we can cast our own Chaos Bolts. We get a lot of projectiles, and then Chthonic Fissure has this thing called Acid Skin, which gives us, applies to the enemy a debuff, increased chance to receive a crit, which is kind of like crit vulnerability. So that, along with IcyVeins, seems like we have a pretty good way of scaling our crit. We can scale some damage and hopefully make our crit Chaos Bolt builds pop off. So is this supposed to be a Lich build? Is this supposed to be a Warlock build? I don't know, because Chaos Bolt, frankly, is accessible to both. If you want to proc it off of your Chthonic Fissure, obviously you have to be a Warlock there, but there's a lot of mixing and matching. And that's the fun part. I don't know what the right answer is. We have a lot of moving parts. And even if you have all the information sitting in front of you, it's like, well, do you want to be a low life build? Do you want to be using Death Seal? Because Death Seal's giga strong. It's very, we've been using it for a long time. Or do you want to go low life and do like the new thing, proccing things off Chthonic Fissure instead and have more damage? It's a good question. I don't know. So Warlock looks excellent. I'm very happy with it. We will be doing another one of these videos shortly talking about Falconer. The TLDR in Falconer so far, we literally only have the Mastery. We don't have anything else. The Mastery looks good defensively. The Mastery looks boring offensively. Hopefully the skills are awesome. Hopefully whatever the Falcon actually does ends up being very exciting. But my 1 minute reaction to what we have for Falconer so far, based on this little leak, is it looks good defensively. The offensive nodes look boring. It's going to be garbage. No one's going to play it. And spears are still going to be bad. Quote me. All right. That's it. Remember, on February 21st, we have the release of Last Epoch. February 22nd, and going on for two weeks beyond that, is Twitch drops, both on my stream and anyone, probably anybody else who's streaming on twitch.tv as well. Hopefully anyone who's not, or anyone else who's streaming on the website. So that's it. Sounds good. I'm very excited. I know a number of builds that I've been brewing along with some other people, but we'll talk about those at a later point in time. I'm very excited for later this month. I'll see you then.